There is a woman in Nebraska who has been married to a BNSF conductor for 16 years, and she is sitting in her living room trying to explain to a reporter what happened when her husband worked 13 straight days without a single break. And halfway through the interview, she starts crying because the memory is coming back to her now. The memory of watching him walk through the door after that final shift and just completely collapse. And he cried for 2 days straight, maybe 3. She cannot remember exactly. And she could not do anything except watch, because that is what it means to be married to a railroad worker in America in 2026. Her husband broke down the numbers for that same interview, and what he told them was this. A normal worker with a 40-hour week gets about 104 weekend days off per year because that is just how weekends work out, and last year he had 49 days off total across the entire calendar. And only 15 of those fell on an actual weekend, and at one point he worked 450 hours in a single month, which, if you do the math, means he was averaging 15 hours a day for 30 consecutive days, without any real break at all. And the thing you need to understand about railroad work is that this is not some entry-level problem that eventually goes away once you build seniority and get a better schedule. A conductor or engineer is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for their entire career until they retire or quit. And when that phone rings, they have about 90 minutes to 2 hours to get to the yard and climb aboard a train. That might keep them away from home anywhere from 12 to 60 hours, depending on where they are going and how long they train. Have to sit in a hotel room at the away terminal waiting for their return assignment to come through. There is a woman named Whitney Ballard who has been writing about being a railroad wife for years now. And she described what it feels like to listen to marriage advice that tells you to sync your calendars with your spouse, when in reality you have not had anything resembling a calendar since the day you said I do. She talked about going to family functions and feeling sorry for herself because she knows her cousin's spouses will be there and her husband will not. And she talked about the night her husband left for a 36-hour trip right after they had a screaming argument about something she cannot even remember anymore. And she talked about how the preacher says, never go to bed angry. But that advice does not work when your husband is already 100 miles down the track before you have had time to cool off. Another railroad wife put it about as directly as anyone could when she told a reporter that she feels more like a single parent now than she has ever felt in her entire 16 years of marriage. And she said that is why the railroad has one of the highest divorce rates of any profession in the country, because you cannot be a real partner to someone who is never actually there. She takes her kids everywhere alone. She handles every school event and every doctor's appointment and every emergency alone. And when she even thinks about having a third child, the question is not whether she and her husband can handle it together, but whether she can handle another child entirely by herself. Because that is effectively what railroad parenting has become. A BNSF engineer who had been on the job for 12 years tried to explain what it feels like to live under this system day after day, and what he said was that when you are on call around the clock every single day of your life, everywhere you go you have your phone in your pocket, and you are constantly worried about missing the call. He called it a looming cloud that follows you everywhere, and he said there is nothing peaceful about living this way. Because the only time you are not subject to being called is during the 10 hours after you tie off from your previous run, and even then you are just counting down until the phone can ring again. The schedule destroys everything that normally holds a marriage together over time. You cannot plan a vacation because you do not know when you will be working. You cannot commit to a birthday party or a school play or a holiday dinner because any of those might fall on what the railroad considers a high-impact day. And if you take that time off, you lose points under attendance policies that treat your presence at work like a score in a video game that only goes down. There is no rhythm to life, no routine, no shared meals at the same time each day, just an endless rotation of waiting for the phone to ring and then being gone for 2 or 3 days, and then coming home completely exhausted and trying to reconnect with people who have been living their own lives without you. And then there's the trauma that comes with operating a locomotive for 20 or 30 years. The statistics say that roughly 44% of railroad operating employees have been involved in at least one critical incident during their career. And the research shows that over 16% of locomotive engineers develop post-traumatic stress disorder from what they witness out there. The vice president of the Locomotive Engineers Union said that the average engineer will face 3 traumatic incidents over a 25-year career, and the hardest part is that you are usually the last person to see that particular individual alive before impact. What this means is that railroad workers are not just dealing with exhaustion and unpredictable schedules and never being home for the important moments, but also carrying around psychological wounds that most people never have to confront in their entire lives. They come home and try to be present for their families while replaying scenes in their heads that would break most people. And they do this without adequate mental health support because the industry has historically treated these incidents as just part of the job that you signed up for. The old-timers on the railroad forums talk about what things used to be like back when crews stayed at railroad YMCAs at the away terminals. And one veteran with 30 years on the job mentioned casually that he has 3 ex-wives from his time on the rails, and another guy remembered how the senior conductors used to have a woman at each end of the line, one at home and one at the away terminal, and one particular old-timer apparently told his 2 families that he did not get paid for hauling empties. The phrase that keeps coming up in these discussions is something a mentor once told a younger railroader: "The railroad never ruined a good relationship, but it sure as anything never helped a bad one either." The wives who are still trying to make it work describe staying up late into the night just to spend time with their husbands when they finally get home, and then regretting it the next morning when the children wake up and need attention and you have had 3 hours of sleep. They describe watching their husbands fall asleep on the couch still wearing dirty jeans, because that is a whole different level of exhaustion when a man cannot even change before passing out. And they describe looking at the company slogan on the back of his safety vest that says, "I am coming home," and trying not to ask when because the answer will only make things harder. The reviews that current workers leave on job sites tell the same story over and over again. No life outside of work whatsoever, none at all. If you have a family, do not even try this job. Long hours, work-life balance is impossible to manage. The attendance policy allows virtually no time off, and it is extremely hard to get approval to use time off that you have rightfully earned. As a train and engine employee, you are on call every single day of your entire career with no scheduled days off ever. When BNSF introduced their high-vis attendance policy back in February of 2022, the families felt the impact immediately. A conductor with 3 children out in Wyoming said there are times she goes an entire week without seeing her kids for more than 10 or 15 minutes at a stretch, and she described the policy as brutal. And she was not using that word for dramatic effect. Missing your child's birthday because you have to protect your attendance points is not simply an inconvenience. It is the kind of thing that slowly hollows out a marriage over months and years until there is nothing left inside but 2 people who happen to share an address and a bank account. That is where we are in the American freight rail industry in 2026. Watching families fall apart, one missed dinner at a time, while the locomotives keep rolling across the country and the phones keep ringing at 2 in the morning for another call to duty.